All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the new normal, employee engagement and performance when working remotely. Super excited to have with us Aaron Adams with Engagedly. He is a partner HR strategy and alignment. And I know folks are just coming on, so I want to say welcome, and we're going to take just a minute to allow the technology to catch up with us and for you guys to get situated. And while we're doing that, I want to say thank you to our sponsors today. Without the Whitmarsh Consulting Group and David Whitmarsh's expertise and his team expertise, we would not have been able to put this summit together in such a short notice. The Whitmarsh Consulting Group specializes in multi-channel marketing strategies as well as HR information technology consulting and solutions. I also want to say thank you to our other sponsor, Insperity, HR that makes a difference. Insperity has been gracious enough to offer our attendees a free HR financial analysis report and debrief. Forgive me if you've attended any of the other sessions because I'm going to repeat my enthusiasm for this just about every time. The HR financial analysis and report and debrief is actually a big deal. It's somewhere between 3 and 10 hours of their team's analysis. And certainly right now with HR having to shuffle around resources and figure out what their new strategy is with this new normal, so to speak, that a little bit of support and assistance is something that is well deserved and needed. So don't hesitate to reach out to them. They know that not every person that takes advantage of this offer is going to be a good fit for them. So do not prejudge whether or not that's you. Just take them up on their offer. You can find out more at turnkeycoachingsolutions.net HR report. And the last bit, HR report is case sensitive. So, I just had it do subtitles instead. That's all right. We'll run with it. My name is Anissa Avon, and I'm the CEO of TurnKey Coaching and Development Solutions. We are an enterprise learning and development solutions provider. We provide executive coaching, learning and development, training solutions, assessments, HR consulting, and OD consulting. We have on-the-ground collaborators and experts in every major metropolitan area in the U.S. and in key hubs globally. So when I went to my team and I said, what are we going to do in this pandemic? How can we help our clients? We decided that we would gather experts like Aaron. Hello, Aaron.
Hello.
And we would offer their expertise as a means of helping us mutually get through this challenging and difficult time for business and HR strategies that we can actually take action on. So that is in fact our summit, Leading in a Crisis, Actionable Business and HR Strategies for Navigating Crisis and Change. We have 40 plus speakers and counting, and only 28 of which are actually live on the portal. So do check back often. And let us know what you would like to see in regards to experts or topics that you believe would be useful and helpful. So 2 things I'm going to mention briefly. One, Turnkey is providing BOGO training specifically focused on virtual training and for topics that are relevant for our situation: remote leadership, neuro leadership, and employee motivation in regards to leading remote teams, business continuity, strategic thinking, managing conflict during times of crisis, crisis management, etc. So if we may be of service, let us know what you're looking for. And the other thing that we've put together with our team of career experts and outplacement specialists is a name your own price outplacement services. Obviously, free, it has no value. But the next best thing is name your own price. So you can reach out to me at leader@turnkeycoachingsolutions.com. And I can share a little bit more about that if you're going through that difficult time related to furloughs and outplacement and want to provide something for your employees. So super excited that Aaron is with us. Aaron has a deep experience in organizational psychology. That's where he got his master's degree. He's been working many years in the OD, organizational development field. He has done consulting in the areas of engagement and executive assessment centers. And your experience, Aaron, lends itself perfectly for, let me stop sharing and I'll just, there we go, for this topic, specifically around engagement, the new normal, employee engagement and performance when working remotely. Share with us what makes you the expert and what are we going to learn today?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the title. Share with me why you're the expert, because I'm always learning, right? And I'm humble enough to admit that I only know what I know, and then I'll just kind of relearn what I don't and kind of apply as needed. I think, having worked with organizations and applying some of the models that they use to assess and measure engagement and look at this and develop action plans, work with focus groups and think about what is the process for engaging our employees. And I'll talk more about that when we get into, the different strategies around that. But having that be not only my work that I do, but also mainly my passion. So in my free time, you stay actively engaged within PSYOP, kind of digesting the content that comes from other practitioners, learning from other practitioners, attending webinars like this. So, just really passionate about what we do and the work and the value we provide, and then continually find ways as the market evolves, as the environment changes, to address some of those needs that we have regarding engagement. So I think that's having that approach and that mindset provides, over the years of doing it, has lended me to what I wouldn't call myself an expert a lot of times, but when I talk to people, they're like, I learned a lot of, if they learn and I can educate them when I'm talking to them, their reaction tends to be they come to me for guidance on things, which feels great. And so to be positioned as an expert today, I'm honored to be in this role, talking with your group, your organization, your audience that you have, and hopefully they can learn a little bit. And that's my goal, is just to educate. So I think that is my best way to describe it.
Excellent. I'm excited about that. So for those of you who have joined us today, first we want to say thank you. And we also want to say, share with us what your most pressing questions are around engagement when working remotely, or if you're having a challenge or you want to support your team and you're not sure how, don't hesitate to submit your question in the chat box. I'll be monitoring that. So Aaron, start us off, tell us about what given your expertise, what are you seeing folks are having to do to foster that engagement right now in this environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's, we've kind of been, we've been forced to make a change here within our current environment. And do you want me to start walking through the slides too with them? And he says,
sure.
I facilitate?
Yeah.
Okay,
why don't
great.
You share your screen?
So her question segues really well into what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to go ahead and share with you. So it's this new normal. Like, what is, I think Anissa's question is really good. We think about, how do we maybe do what we were doing before, or continue on those initiatives, but everything's changed. And so we talk about this new normal, but it's kind of a catch, right? The new normal, the dust hasn't settled, right? We're trying to navigate this, a lot of ambiguity and a lot of uncertainty that's happening at a faster pace, right? Digital transformation and this kind of environment has been happening for some time. And one of my colleagues the other day, we were talking about it, and they said, we just kind of been dipping our toe in it, but now you're forced into it. So what the new normal is I share this, right? So some of you who are practitioners out there, this probably looks pretty similar to some of the stuff you've seen before. And that's no surprise, right? Because what we're looking at here is just a model for change, and that's what's normal right now. So this is actually, Bridges' model of transition. It helps organizations understand and more effectively manage the work on the personnel side, right? So a human side of change. This has been used for over 30 years. So we're all somewhere probably in here, right? If we think about that first phase, things are ending, right? Our identity, we're losing some things. We're losing maybe that connection at work, which we'll talk about later as we shift to remote work. So things we're having to let go. And as we move past that, letting go stage, we're like in this in-between state. And you see some of these feelings that we all may be going through right now in that kind of neutral area, and what that means for us, Right? So the old is gone, the new isn't fully operational, but there will be a period of time, whether we're there now, for some of us maybe, because maybe we've been working remotely for some period of time, and that new beginning and that excitement that comes along with it is there. But I'd say this is the normal, right? The normal is really when it comes to us, all of us, experiencing change. And it's unanticipated change, and it's forced upon us change. So if those are comfortable with it, great, we can embrace it. But those of us who aren't, maybe there's a little shock and a little fear, but it's okay, right? I mean, there are things that as people we're going to go through here naturally, and we see on that human side. So I think that's what the new normal is. So when we talk about the new normal, if that's this change, and that's that stuff we don't know how to react, but let's talk about the things we do know, right? So let's transition to the absolutes, or the truths that we know, and let's just shift the conversation. Say, okay, we're all going through change. That's great. But now let's talk about the things we know, and how do we now, we have this change, we still got to do things like performance and engagement. So what do we know about performance? Well, I want to get alignment first there. Like, as a group, we need to all agree on a few things. Like, let's not have competing visions around this. And Nisa, I think we could talk about this here too and get your reactions. But performance, and I was grabbing a definition to share with everybody that we talk about it. I really actually like Google's definition. When you just search performance management, it's an ongoing communication, right, between the employee and their manager, and it's about supporting the strategic objectives of the organization, right? So that alignment aspect, I really liked that component. One of the things we know, though, about performance management is a few years ago, CEB did a study, and they said that we spend 210 hours each year, right, doing the performance reviews, right? Because a lot of people think of performance management and they think of performance reviews. Around that same time, Deloitte was doing a study, and they found that only 8% of organizations or companies believe that their current performance management systems drive value. So it's interesting, right? We agree that it's this, but we're maybe doing it in a different way, and that being, right, maybe the appraisal. That is not performance management, and we don't get a lot of value from it. So yeah, I mean, I think thoughts there, Anissa, just initially about what
so
that.
that's huge. Just this idea that this is about an ongoing process of communication is a shift in mindset for a lot of folks. Many people think of performance management as in your KPIs, that's a piece of it, as in what's the end game and how much have we done to contribute to that end game. And they're measuring their performance against the end game as opposed to the small steps along the way. The pieces that I really appreciate about what you're talking about here is performance management is very different than performance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think the way we focused on performance traditionally, right, is a top-down kind of backwards focused system, where it is primarily through that review where it's very evaluative, right? And it's more of that reviewer as the judge. And it's essentially, if you look at it from the employee side, that's demotivating, right? That's not going to be a model that's going to be sustainable. So what I propose, or what we share now, is we'll talk about the new normal of performance, is really this more continuous approach, like what you alluded to, right? It's employee driven. A lot of it's self-directed in terms of where they're going to grow to be more effective as they're building, those connections with the work, that forward focused aspect, right? Hey, let's focus on the things you can change. Let's not talk about the water under the bridge. And then shifting over to more frequent interactions, right? Whether that be quarterly, monthly, weekly. The cadence, I think, is always dictated by the pace of the business, or the comfortability with the manager and that transition they may be making. But I do like what you're saying, making the more empowering approach that facilitates better performance.
Yeah.
And I think that's the end of the day.
I know you're going to get to this at some point, but the technology that Engagedly has, for example, sets people up to be able to have that ongoing communication. One of the challenges of performance management in general, and why we were traditionally stuck with the once a year, or even at best once a quarter, was because it is difficult to sit down with someone on a regular basis and support them in feedback related to their performance. And so I'm glad you're going to get to that at some point. My question around that was, what are you seeing right now too, related to remote organizations that are having to suddenly work from home, and there's not as much communication as there needs to be?
Mhm. Yeah, I think a lot of people are honestly scrambling to fill the gaps really quickly. I mean, you saw the Zoom stock, as we're using today, bump up like 400%. So they're doing stuff to put the tools in line. And I'll actually talk about that, like what we'll go into here after we get, agreement. And this first part is really about getting agreement so we're all aligned as a group here. Like we agree here based on what we talked about in performance, that this is a more ongoing approach that is more continuous is probably the better way to go. Right. So that's probably, and we'll get to the tools that you're talking about here in a minute. And then think about those questions that you have around the tools, because we're going to talk a lot about the tools. And I'm going to propose and share tools with the group here today. They, download the slides, because I put information in here that we'll kind of glaze over today, because I do want you to have reference information for you to go back to and look at and say, okay, what was Aaron talking about there? What did Aaron and Anissa say here? That really resonated with me. Maybe you have a piece of a little nugget in there that you can go back to and apply. But we agree on performance, right? More continuous, more forward focused. Let's not manage through the review. Let's not do that traditional process. That's the market's already shifted there, and you have like Anissa said, we have tools to support that, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail. The next thing is shifting the conversation. Okay, we said performance. Now let's get alignment around engagement. When we talk about engagement, a lot of times I've seen there's multiple definitions, and you can actually pull up articles where they define it over time. But I always like to say, what does it look like? Right? How do you know when somebody's engaged? They're emotionally invested, right? They're physically willing to kind of go and, put in their effort. And they're always thinking about the work and being immersed within the process of, like, whether it's the task or design, they're there, and they're also bought into the mission for the organization. So we know that that's what it looks like. Now, why is it important? Well, there's a lot of resources out there that we can all go to. What I would share is that organizations that are the best in engaging their employees achieve earnings per share and growth that are 4 times more than that of their competitors, right? And so that's research done by Gallup, and Gallup tends to be they started a whole new engagement trend years ago. So now if we look at levels of engagement, it's pretty interesting, right? We talk about, the good news is that we're over time, as the last report in 2018, that we are increasing the levels of engagement from before, but we're still at 34% of actively engaged, with 13% not actively disengaged, and then 53% kind of floating in the middle. So engagement's important because it leads to productivity, right? We know there's a relationship between performance and productivity and engagement. So what does it look like? We see here, and so that's kind of a unifying view of, like, hey, we know we agree upon what it looks like. Anything you want to add to that, Anissa, in terms of, just talking about
just a little exclamation point that this is they're engaged when they express themselves physically, cognitively, and emotionally. And we've all met or haven't had employees that are physically present, but they're not engaging in the dialogue. And in this day and time, it's about engaging in the solutions, engaging in being resourceful, engaging in supporting their co-workers. And then, of course, emotionally, we know that if folks aren't showing up at work passionately, then that is a signal of something that an organization can do. That's the first order of business. And at some point, it may be that individual isn't a good fit for the mission. But oftentimes it's about, and I know you're going to get to this as well, but it's also about engaging them at what their interests are and providing them with sufficient feedback along the way, that ongoing communication.
Yeah, I love that last piece you said. And there's, she's naturally making connections, is what we'll talk about as we go along. Back when we get to the employee needs, I think a lot of when we get to that, we'll start to get us to think about, okay, well, how do we engage them? And then we'll talk and connect the tools here. First part, right, always getting alignment, like what we're talking about, because there are fundamental disagreements sometimes that people have. I mean, not necessarily between Anissa and I, but in general, when we talk about in the business. So the way I always frame this conversation too, when we talk about solutions, and like Anissa had said before, tools, 2 ways, right? One is we can assess the degree to which people are engaged. And that's what we talk about the engagement survey. So the diagnostic, like going to the doctor. How are you doing? Were we doing well? What are some areas we might need to work on? Then the other piece, and this is the emphasis and the shift now that we're seeing, that wasn't as prevalent before, but as Anissa as Anissa alluded to, because of the technology tools that we have, is being incorporated more often, and that's the design. So the design thinking around engagement, how do we build systems? How do we design work and processes in a way that engages the employee? We've now reframed it. We can get the data. That's fine. The data is really easy to get now. That's no longer a challenge. The challenge is now becoming, how do we invest in our employees and in the systems and the processes in a way that engages them? And I like to put these two things out there, because what I see a lot of times is employee engagement surveys and people using that as the solution to engagement. And that does not mean you have an engagement strategy. So
yeah, I think that's pretty well said. I think a lot of our folks on the call can relate to a survey equating to strategy. And the challenge is, of course, once you get the survey, making sure you do something with it. If you don't want to leave your employees feeling like you really don't care. You're asking questions you have no intention to do anything about. So.
Yeah, and that's and we'll get into that too when we talk about the employee needs, what that could damage some of the essential needs they have. So we talked about the new normal change. I would propose a new normal when we talk about the systems we have, right? So if we take performance and we have a continuous performance model. If you see me looking over here, I have a couple screens, so I'm not looking off into the distance. But we have performance, and we say, okay, the idea there would be continuous, more progressive model. Getting rid of the traditional kind of systems, designing systems in a way that engages the user and drives engagement. So not just the survey, but driving engagement through the tools that we use. And I would argue that that's the new normal, right? And you're going to hear a lot of you're going to start to hear more in the industry. You're already starting to hear it as practitioners, and in the buzz around employee experience, or HR even being rebranded as employee experience, and bringing together more cross-functional UX and UI designers, because they're reframing the way they think, given the technology has afforded us the ability to focus on the employee experience. So a lot of cross-functional collaboration I'm seeing lately in the field that really addresses this, and which I would call the new normal. And that'll be the, some of us are ahead of the curve and probably already implementing a lot of these things, but I would call this the new normal. Anything you want to add, Anissa, to this new normal?
No, I think your this next piece is going to really start to bring it all together.
Yeah. So that's kind of setting the stage for our conversation today. So if we've agreed upon that the new normal is this kind of system, well then we need to talk about the work that we're doing now. And so now let's focus on the situation at hand. All right, so we have remote work, essential needs, and some tools to help. Now, what we'll talk about a little bit here in these following slides will be, we're going to talk about the nature of the remote work, what we need from work. And so I'm going to go back to the fundamentals. I'm going to go back to the beginning of these employee needs and then connect in these more progressive and engaging tools that can support these remote workers. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. We just agreed in the beginning to set the context for where we go from here. So if we just step out for a second, we talk about remote work. It's been happening for a long time. We talked about this digital transformation to us working from home, right? It's just changing that central location away. And there are some benefits, right? It gives us more access to talent. It's more friendly on the environment. So those of us who are have that very conservation mindset, that is a beneficial kind of a benefit for us. And it's, when we think about the challenges, though, it's harder for us to supervise a lot of times. How do we know they're doing it? And I heard one leader was like calling their people every day when they're at home, which isn't a bad thing at all. But you got to be cognizant of that message that's sending to your employees as well. And there's definitely fewer networking opportunities. And this is really important because we've seen a gradual shift to working from home or having those flexible environments. And when the last report estimates, roughly about 5% of the workforce, or about 6.5 million people, were either working from home or had that capability. Imagine that number today. I mean, yeah. All of us know that number is way higher than that. So,
well, and what happens when folks get a little taste of that kind of flexibility? We already know that the studies show that about 30% of folks, when they're looking for new opportunities, looking for a job, prior to COVID-19, they would prefer, about 30% said, I will change a job if it means I have the opportunity to have more flexibility and work from home. And another 30% said that I would take less money for this kind of flexibility. So now we've got folks who are now experiencing remote work perhaps for the first time. And this is different because they're also having to juggle their toddlers and their children, and in my case, my cats and my dogs and all of that. So what you're sharing is also this new normal that more organizations are going to have to bring when they bring folks back, or when they get back to normal. There's going to have to be some a reckoning, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a great point. And when we think about, access to talent, I mean, some people select us a lot of times, be given that flexibility. And there's some interesting things I've heard too in interviewing some of our clients about, once you take away their option to go to work, people are actually thirsting for going back to work. So I think there's a lot of personal preference in there too. That's becoming very interesting as we actually see people put into the situation. Some of our assumptions are being challenged, right, as practitioners, which is exciting.
Very good.
All right, so shifting to kind of what we need, right? So we know what remote work is, what's changing, some of the benefits, what we essentially need. I'm going to cover each one of these things. So I'd make the case that we're going to focus on what I would call 5 essential needs. First, the tools to get the job done. So Zoom, not a surprise at all that we needed better tools to stay connected and collaborate with one another, right? So collaboration is key too to the way we work. There's some degree of collaboration because there's interdependence. When we're all working towards a common objective, we're all going to need some way to kind of collaborate, or at least stay aligned with the way we work with each other. And that could be those tools could vary. We'll talk about feedback, right? The importance of giving people feedback, and even that relates to the frequency and the quality of feedback. And I think Anissa and her team as practitioners, they have a lot of insight in terms of guidance around the best ways to frame feedback, and even more so than myself or even some of my colleagues, right? Because as coaches, they can do that really well. And then a bigger picture things. I start with these almost seem like tactical, like, no duh, Aaron, like we know those things. Then stepping back at the bigger picture, right? Establishing how do we make people still feel like they belong, and feel connected. So that sense of belonging is very important. And then that trust, and Anissa and I kind of talked about the trust piece a little bit, because, if you're calling them all the time, do they feel trusted? Right? Do they feel like you're kind of helicoptering around and, trying to check on what they're doing because you don't have trust in them? So those are things that we'll talk about a little bit in more detail. Now, as these slides progress, there'll kind of be 2 parts to each one of these. One part I'll just kind of glaze over, and that's back to that point around download them. They're good reference for you, but the initial pieces will be the discussion, and then it'll be followed by the tools that support each one of those areas that we'll talk about here.
And as you guys download this list right here is a checklist. Do we have the tools? Are they supporting us in collaborating? Does this allow two-way feedback? Are we generating that sense of belonging? And what is the measure of trust that we're demonstrating? And what's the measure of trust that we're getting back? I mean, this is a checklist. So.
Yeah, I love that she said the measurement piece there, and we'll talk more about that as well. So when we talk about the tools, and these will be kind of refreshers for a lot of us, providing the right tools, there's really 2 types of tools, right, that you think about. There's the physical tools they need, which a lot of jobs that force us to go from home, and maybe some of the people are on furlough because they had some very technical tools like the scientific instruments to do the job that you necessarily can't take home with you. Right? You can take a carpentry or like scientific instruments. The other kind of tools really helps expedite and streamline the process. So these are the tools that help us free up our time so we can focus on things that matter, or the more strategic components of our work, or where we really add that incremental value to those overall mission and objectives. These are the tools that we're going to talk about. Right? We're going to talk about how we can create and facilitate around that second grouping of tools. Now, and Anissa and I were talking about this in the other slide, tools, right? Those making the job easier, providing better training options. So having the right tools actually, can facilitate more effective learning, and then creating a more productive culture as well. So if we think about some of those kind of impactful tools, and there's even some other ones too, and I put this last one in there because Anissa actually said this when we were talking about talent. They'll look at our tools and they'll look at the resources we have. And when they're making a decision to work with us, future talent actually will look at, do we have the tools in place to set them up for success? Yeah. And that's another thing about them.
Very briefly, I just want to tie back in the change management model that you shared with us earlier, when a person is introduced to a new tool, there is oftentimes that high level disengagement around a tool. Frustration, disconnection, I don't get it, you're asking me to learn something new. And so in engagement and helping your folks feel more engaged, what is your recommendation for just a real quick strategy for that onboarding process? If you're going to introduce a new tool, don't just throw it at them. What has been your experience with that?
Yeah, and so this is something that, as a software company that we embed within our processes that we have. So one of the things, you always make sure that your clients that are onboarding have a dedicated CSM and support individual for them. So what they do is it's almost like a consultation, right? The CSM talks with the client and says, what's your value, right? So we think of time to first value. So from an organizational standpoint, can we align with what's valuable? And then deploying the training in a way that, equips those administrators with the skills to be advocates and then comfortable in the tool navigating it. So you need that kind of high touch side, but you also need to couple it with the technical resources and the kind of self-guided resources too as well. So we kind of hit it on 3 tiers. We always talk about CSMs, having a support team, and then having the digital tools that even lay over top of them that are like really quick and easy navigation guides. They're like click through, like how-tos that sit on top of the tools a lot of times, and they'll guide you specific actions you may want to take just through a simple query. So a lot of the training is mostly where we'll focus on the change management process and the socialization through helping them with communication tools as well.
Very good.
Yep. So the second slide, as we so the tools, you'll hear tools in each one. So tools kind of set the stage actually for when we talk about each one of these other needs. So tools almost sit as like this higher level need. It's the first one you got to make sure they set up for success. You have the tools, and they'll flow into each one of these. So when we talk about collaboration, this is becoming, commonplace. We know the effectiveness of teams in getting work done is pretty undeniable. We're seeing that time and time again. We talk about things in resulting in better problem solving, creating that culture of continuous learning, sharing your talents cross-functionally or within teams to find more optimal solutions. It reminds me of the example I always give is, it's an extreme example, but in 2015, MIT launched Solve, which was more of a crowdsourced solution. What it did is it brought together, and this game Folded, where they had to solve riddles to figure out HIV enzyme. And it took them 3 weeks, right? They crowdsourced and had people in there collaborating on this. So the power of collaboration to the extremes can be extremely beneficial. So we need systems, those tools to help drive collaboration and speed things up. All right. So the reference slide here for you is we really talk about these elements. So within Engagedly, a lot of these might be specific to us, but we frame them more broadly for you to think about. So the different types of tools that may support collaboration, the social aspects, the learning, the real-time feedback components, goal settings, another form of feedback. I think a lot of people don't see that a lot of times, but giving insight to people in terms of feedback and how my progress is impacting the overall business, and some of that data around the tangible stuff that we're working toward is always really important. And then even those ways for ongoing check-ins. So not a ton of time we spend here. This is more for your reference. I want to leave you with something, and this is one of those things I mentioned I'll leave you with. Before we go on to the next session, Anissa, any comments you want to add to that in terms of as we talk about collaboration or some of those things we just touched on?
Well, I think if there's time, we may come back to the difference between a meeting and a check-in. Otherwise, we're going to scare everybody to death. But
okay, sounds good. That's a great question, everybody, that Anissa's asking. It's a pretty common question too that we focus. So the other piece, we talk about, we got collaboration, then we move to feedback, right? Feedback actually, it motivates people, right? You give them feedback, and it's a way to kind of, my self-efficacy and my feelings of control, and I can increase that within people. So people need feedback in relation. A lot of times we're seeing the most effective feedback that gives is to the goal, right? The important thing about feedback too is just to make sure you're removing those barriers to getting feedback. We all know the bottleneck philosophy. So, focusing on removing some of those elements. And then when we talk about the feedback, really making sure that we give it regularly and we focus on more of the behavior than the person. And that's always really important we've heard this time and time again. It's when you talk about somebody versus something, it's better to talk about something that they can change and they can influence, because it's hard for me to maybe change myself and my personality, but it may be like something related to a goal or something specific that I can change or achieve or strive towards is good. And the most effective feedback we're seeing is, if we had to ask us, it would be to the goal. Goal specific feedback is very powerful. We see a lot of engagement and interaction within tools around goal feedback. So making sure your goal setting systems have good feedback channels within them to engage with your users in that process and your employees.
Well, and I think on that note, one of the things that we find that leaders and HR professionals want to teach their leaders about providing effective feedback is it is not about the person. It is about the goal that you have for them. And sometimes that's tangible, tactical, work product and performance. And other times it's about their mindset, their attitude. How do people use the tools, for example? How do they do that ongoing with individuals who perhaps might need a shift in their emotional intelligence, or you want to share with them, it's really important that we build engagement and a culture of empathy right now, a culture of compassion right now. And, if they have a manager that is constantly driving for the same results, you want to be right. There's a disconnect there.
Yeah, so a few things, right? I like how you said the first part. I just to say that, kind of reiterate what you said. I always make sure the goals are quantifiable and verifiable, right? So you may have quantities that are very tangible aspects to a goal that they're striving to something, and then you may have more verifiable components. So a lot of times what we do is, we open up visibility in line of sight. So providing us views as managers of our managers, and kind of gives that line of sight through, so we create some transparency. Because a lot of times what we see in these tools, they've been very siloed and we don't know what's happening in these silos. So open up visibility, and that's a behavior change and a shift. And but once you do that, you breed another level of accountability, right? Because there is visibility, not just from my manager, but maybe my manager's manager sees it, and so on. And they're establishing more accountability because, we can see that manager that's really checking in and having that ongoing interaction with the goal is important. So they're checking in, they're getting feedback, they're moving the dial on this. But then I could see underneath that nothing's happening with their employees. How are they managing them? So the conversation may shift there. And then if we get into that point where we see that gap as an emotional intelligence, sometimes it might be out of scope for the manager to coach on that, but to get resources on that, the first step is to awareness, right? Bring in within the systems what we can control is we can bring visibility, which then we know helps drive more accountability and more ownership. And so those are the tools that we can provide now. If I had to say, how do I affect their, emotional intelligence? I would say, well, I have this friend, her name's Anissa. You could she has some resources. So I think that would be my, I think that's the best way. All we can do within these technology tools or within that scope, you could prompt them in terms of like mapping in, but maybe that's where the learning component comes in. There's some content that drives them there in terms of like if they're creating courses. But again, the course content there, I would say, consult the experts. And not to shamelessly plug your services, but you're the experts, right? That's what you do. Don't try to be the experts where you're not, and be humble enough to know that where you're going to need some help, it's okay, because there's people built to help.
Well, and I think thank you. And I think the beautiful thing about using technology for ongoing feedback and performance management is that it does keep the conversation not on the person, and perhaps the things that are wrong with them. And that's oftentimes what managers do wrong in giving feedback. It is their language that ends up being misinterpreted as them accosting the individual and who they are, as opposed to the work product. And that's two very different things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I completely agree with that statement. So we moved from the very tangible things that we talked about in the beginning. I said, let's talk about when we give we have the tools, right? We're talking about feedback and collaboration. Those are very, top of mind stuff that we know. Now stepping back into these bigger pictures and saying these are really important, right? That we think about, do our systems, do the way we have established this environment to working from home, this is a really essential need. People feeling like they're included, right? They're accepted, like they're still there. Because they're missing that conversation, the pass through the cubicles, where they walk in the halls, the Jack Dorsey style of like walking through and doing some management that way, and just kind of through conversations. They're missing maybe some of that. So the sense of belonging is really important here. So we essentially all want to feel included in the way we work. And that's important to keep in mind as we make this shift. This is probably one of the harder things to do, to ensure that people, ask ourselves the question, like, how do we ensure that people have that sense of belonging? So we always talk about, like in the tools, now this is where that engagement really starts to come in. Can you, in these technology tools that you're using, celebrate successes and share that openly? How do you encourage open communication and dialogues? And then Anissa said it really well with trust, and I would agree with trust and sense of belonging, that we want to make sure that we're staying in tune. So those surveys are a good tool for us, just really simple, short surveys that keep us in tune with the employees' sentiments and perceptions around their sense of belonging. Just do it regularly, kind of make it a habit thing, like, hey, this is the initiative, and you can jokingly say, hey, that we're doing checking in, just seeing how everybody's feeling, right? So, and asking some questions around that sense of belonging. So if you start to see shifts, you get kind of where they're at, how can you make some adjustments, and gathering that qualitative and quantitative data into that conversation is always really important to you when you're framing those. So we always talk about tools to support that. Again, recognizing people, having some kind of rewards and recognition system. Those are really powerful right now, especially ones that you can align to your value system. So the values you're trying to drive, the ones that you put up on the board, maybe you never talk about after that, might be a good time to operationalize those into your tools. And then again, the collaboration, the surveys. Anything you want to add? I know we're getting close on time, Anissa, but anything you want to add before we move on to that last piece around trust?
I think let's go to the last piece with one little caveat here. This rewards and recognition at this moment is also about recognizing when people are doing their best. It's also about collaborating and recognizing when people maintain their sense of urgency to get things done, even at home, while still recognizing that we're all dealing with so much more than probably ever before in many ways. Fear, anxiety, family, illness, economic uncertainty, etc. And I think that it's also important to recognize individuals for showing up to the best of their ability. And that piece, I think, will build that sense of belonging.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the double down on empathy, right? Empathy is key within where we're at today. So last piece, and similar sense of belonging, really important, right? Having confidence in those people that they're going to act the way that they say they're going to act. So just from a data perspective, there was a good study done back in 2017 when they did a comparison between low trust companies and high trust companies. And they found that the high trust companies basically had 74% less stress, 50% higher productivity, 106% more energy at work, 13% fewer sick days, 76% more engagement, 29% more satisfaction in life, and 40% less burnout. Wow, right? Trust is important. And those for you who you work in an agile environment, even more so. And when we think about trust, just being responsive is important. Keeping employees in the loop, because there are two channels of information that they have, right? The formal and the informal. You want to try to stay in front of the informal with these formal lines, so your tools are a good way to do that. And then really just bringing people together and making connections. So we're making sure that the digital resources that we put into place support that, and it'll be a lot of the similar tools that we talked about in the sense of belonging that also apply to trust too as well. So I think those are always important to keep in mind. So these are the tools we talked about today and some of the essential needs, and these are actually was a white paper that we did and we shared out with our clients and prospects as we were giving access to our tools for free for a lot of people during this time. So yeah, that was my piece. I know we're right at time, Anissa, so I want to be cognizant of that. So
Thank you. That's been fantastic. Tell folks what you are sharing in relationship to Engagedly, and I know that you guys have a special offer, and I want to make sure that you share with people how they can get in touch with you, as well as what Engagedly is offering to participants of our summit.
yeah, absolutely. So what we're offering is right here in front of you. This remote workers toolkit, all these tools that you see here on the left-hand side and that I talked to and I actually connected into the way it could support some of these essential needs that exist within your remote workers, are all free for you guys until I believe the end of Q3. So just reach out, connect to Engagedly. Anissa's got some of our contact information, but yeah, no cost. Right, essentially, we're just opening it up because we know it's a tough time, and we feel that these tools and connecting people could add a lot of value. Our CEO and our president were very passionate about opening the platform up to people. And so, if you're interested and you want to learn more, just take a demo and see what you may be signing up for. It is free until the end of Q3. We'll give you kind of access to that. So, thanks, Anissa, for reminding us about that.
Absolutely, and you guys can also reach out to me, and I can share with you a little bit more about the white papers that he's mentioned, etc. I'm at leader@TurnKeyCoachingSolutions.com. So I know that we've got a question that just came in. Let's see if I can find that. There it is. Nellie, actually, if you'll submit your question in the Q&A box, then I'll read that for Aaron. So Aaron, I do have a question about, ongoing communication is what performance feedback is about. However, we all know managers whose idea of ongoing communication is, what are you doing now? What are you doing now? Hey, do it this way. Hey, I've got something else for you to do. And you need to switch the priority that I gave you 10 seconds ago and do my priority, right? So how can folks use tools that are focused on the outcome, like Engagedly, to actually train their managers to be better at that performance management piece?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, the responsibility and the education sits on internal practitioners to set the stage and the context. So within these tools, they have a lot of abilities to say, to help them define it, right? So they, working with the managers, they can have those conversations with them and then frame those in such a way and say, hey, we had that conversation. Here's actually what we built out for what is performance, or to your point earlier, the difference between the one-on-one and the check-in. What is a check-in, and what are the things we should be asking about? So giving and empowering the practitioners to do what they do well, right? Set the context, get the focus areas and the framing of it, and then the managers are just coloring in, right? It's like kind of getting that coloring book you get. Everybody's a great artist when all they need to do is color within the lines, and I think it's the responsibility of the practitioners. So the tools need to be able to support that, and so we always give that kind of support to the administrators.
Beautiful.
Facilitators.
And the idea that we didn't quite get into this, so this is something that I'm super excited about in relationship to Engagedly, is I have run my own business for, I feel like I'm super old because it's been for forever.
You're not.
And the keys to any leader's desire to help their team fulfill the goals is about collaborating on the vision, collaborating on the mission, coming up with really achievable goals that are also stretch us, right? But part of the day-to-day means that it's difficult to stay focused on the priorities that we've agreed to, even not just 2 days ago, but let alone a year ago when we did our strategic planning. Engagedly platform helps people set goals, and then their team, and it cascades. So high level goals that cascade down to accounting, that cascade down to marketing, that cascade down to the front line. And then managers have the ability to set key performance indicators and those leading measures, and then work with their team on those leading measures. Talk to us a little bit about that, and why is that effective, and how is it effective?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to even when we talk about being engaged and like where we put our effort toward what's important to the organization. So when you set those goals, right, even the day-to-day stuff that you work on is probably funneling up to some goal, which is then connected to some larger goal. So you have to, it's helpful to say, well, let's enrich the job. right? It's kind of like a Kaizen approach, right? To the way you an assembly line. I see when it starts here, where it goes. Now in my goal, I see what it's connected to and what it impacts. So we can define goals at these different levels. And it can be something, if the work means it's cascaded, like we know the alignment, well, we can cascade out. Great. If you don't know that, that's okay, because you can even align upward as an individual contributor and say, oh, my work connects to my department's goal of X. So that's really important, because that gives us visibility to how my work is directly impacting the work and the strategy of the department, of the business unit, of the organization. And it opens up that channel that we can see very clearly, that at any point in time, we don't got to click through 7 times. It's right there on the face of it. And we
That's
know
right.
how work is connected. Mhm.
That's right. That connection is super essential for employees to know that what they do does make a difference. You know, if someone is on the front lines and they're considering whether or not to make a purchase, or to do something that actually creates greater redundancy, for example, for their coworkers, and they understand that if I make a choice to improve this process, I'm actually contributing to something bigger.
Mhm.
Now, all of a sudden, that engagement is lined up. They're much more likely to self-initiate, much more likely to make decisions that are like, hey, I actually matter here. I want to contribute to the bigger goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talked earlier about feedback, well, we also have a channel in there for feedback within that goal, right? So the other bonus is not just connecting it, helping drive progress, because goals are all about progress. It's not about a goal for evaluation and judgment. It's really about, we all want to get to this endpoint that we've set. How do
Yeah.
we all do that together? So I think it's the progress conversation is always big too. And that's always where I focus people on, like, how do we drive progress? Use the feedback channels to do that. Use the connections that help, like you said, increase their sense of control and autonomy, and empower them. Absolutely. I think very well said, Anissa.
Perfect. Well, I'm very appreciative of you being here. I want to share my screen real quick. That way folks can have an opportunity to make sure that they have our contact information. Aaron, thank you for being here with us. And you guys can give us a call at 281-469-4244 or reach out to Aaron directly. I also want to share with you guys that the outplacement services that we've put together are name your own price. They combine high touch with high tech. Unfortunately, if you are going through layoffs, if you do have employees that you may not be bringing back, and you're wanting to provide, or know that you legally should provide some kind of outplacement services, do reach out. I'm happy to share with you what we've got going on there. And we've created some incredibly high value affordable packages, name your own price to be more specific. I also want to say that, as I mentioned earlier, the summit is growing and expanding. So do check back and join some of our other talks, and reach out to me. Let me know what talks do you want to hear? What experts can we bring in? If you have feedback for us, please reach out and take our webinar feedback, sm.turnkeycoachingsolutions.com/webinar feedback. Thank you, Aaron. This has been incredibly helpful, and the folks on the chat log are saying thank you. And I think that your expertise around engagement and during this time has been very insightful.
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity, and everybody stay safe.
Stay
Take care.
safe.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you for joining us, guys.